Tonight, as Canadians prepare for a March 4th tariff deadline, Donald Trump sows new confusion.
When does it go into effect?
April 2nd.
April 2nd for Canada and Mexico.
Correct.
Whatever the date, some Canadian farmers are rushing their product to the U.S. right now.
The grain won't go bad, but our markets are going to close down.
With the critical minerals deal seemingly done, Chris Brown is in Ukraine at the mines.
The very quickest way for a new project is from 3 to 5 years.
And in the breakdown, will the deal give Ukraine what it wants? And federal conservatives take fresh aim at Mark Carney.
He's demonstrably lied to Canadians.
So what did he say, and is he responding?
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. Just 6 days from a possible round of disastrous U.S. tariffs, government sources tell CBC News they're hopeful damage can be limited, but there are so many ifs. Federal ministers and provincial premiers openly admit that Donald Trump's musings cloud the issue on a daily basis. Today, it happened again. The president answered reporter questions, then his own team stepped in to try to clarify. But with so much trade and so many jobs at risk, Olivia Stefanovich shows us how murky it all remains in Ottawa.
I'm not stopping the tariffs.
On the question of whether tariffs are coming next week, more confusion from the White House.
I was going to do it on April 1st, but I'm a little bit superstitious, so I made it April 2nd.
At his first cabinet meeting, U.S. President Donald Trump appeared to announce he's delaying the 25% levy on all Canadian goods, scheduled for March 4th.
When does it go into effect?
April 2nd.
April 2nd for Canada and Mexico.
Correct.
And
for everything.
But his Secretary of Commerce suggested that March the 4th is still a deadline.
So the big transaction is April 2nd, but the fentanyl-related things, they're working hard on the border. At the end of that 30 days, they have to prove to the president that they've satisfied him to that regard. If they have, then he'll give them a pause, or he won't.
Are tariffs being delayed? On Parliament Hill, cabinet ministers struggled to make sense of it all.
We'll see, One thing we have learned is to take it step by step.
I don't think tariffs are a foregone conclusion.
There seems to be a blistering amount of new policy, but policy is not policy until it's enacted.
The federal government says, as far as it's concerned, nothing has changed. Work continues to shore up security at the border to prevent 25% tariffs from taking effect next week.
We actively and aggressively enforce against fentanyl, and we will continue to do so.
But Trump's comments are moving markets and alarming premiers.
This guy's classic. Every single day he's changing his mind.
There are multiple tariff threats against Canada. They're changing days. It's not even totally clear from his statement what he meant.
And that may be intentional.
Do not react to whatever Trump says, because he says one thing today and another thing tomorrow. Reacting to it actually gives in to exactly what he wants, which is creating chaos and confusion.
According to a senior federal government source, Trump's comments left officials confused. Were the March 4th tariffs on or off? They reviewed all the tape from the White House with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and realized they were, in fact, still on.
So, Olivia, what do we know for sure, if anything, about what's happening next?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, federal cabinet ministers say they have to take their lead from Trump's signed executive orders, which have the fine details. So aside from March 4th, they're bracing for steel and aluminum tariffs March 12th and imported vehicle levies on April 2nd, both set at 25%.
Okay, we'll be watching the calendar. Olivia Stefanovich, thank you.
You're welcome.
If the dates and numbers are enough to make your head spin, imagine trying to make a business decision. The solution for some who sell to the U.S. market, get as much product south fast. Anis Haydari got an up-close look with a Manitoba grain farmer.
These small ports are now 9 to 5.
It's an early start to the day at Landon Friesen's grain farm, beginning with paperwork to get wheat across the U.S. border. He's making that trip more often this winter, trying to get all of his grain to American buyers before a possible tariff hits.
Why is there a rush to get all this grain delivered before March the 4th? The grain's not going anywhere, right? It's not like it'll go bad.
Correct. The grain won't go bad, but our markets are going to close down, or the tariff will hurt the markets, and that's what we're racing against the time.
Canada exports a lot of wheat to the U.S., $1 billion worth in 2023. A 25% tariff could lower American demand, which would lower the price farmers get. That's why farmers like Friesen are rushing before tariffs.
I guess we're coming up here, so...
Yeah, you guys got your passports?
Yeah.
And if it gets harder to ship to the U.S., there's trouble for everyone. It can cost money to change where and who you sell to.
The fact is that the diversification and all of the impacts are going to raise costs of doing businesses for Canadian businesses, and that's going to have an impact for Canadian consumers.
Whatever the impact, farmers like Landon Friesen are just getting their work done for now.
I gotta say, you sound very relaxed for someone whose business might take a 25% hit.
It will hurt industry in Canada. Could cause our exchange rate to really go sideways, or it's going to hurt us at the grocery store maybe. But that's how tariffs work, right? They affect often the consumers, and that's probably what it'll do.
But he also says he's got a lot of time for Americans.
I mean, these are our neighbors to the south. We've done life with them, right? We don't have a big border wall. There's always been a lot of respect for each other, I think. We all need to get along. We can't pick up and move.
All he can do for now is keep moving grain. Anis Haidari, CBC News, near Crystal City, Manitoba.
Donald Trump announced that he's poised to sign, quote, a very big agreement with Ukraine as early as Friday, a deal expected to give the U.S. access to billions of dollars worth of the besieged country's mineral wealth. But as Paul Hunter explains, what is less clear is what Ukraine gets out of the deal.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here, and we put together a great cabinet.
Meeting for the first time with his full cabinet, U.S. President Donald Trump made clear, on the matter of Ukraine, change is now imminent.
We'll be able to make a deal, and again, President Zelenskyy is coming to sign the deal, and it's a great thing. It's a great deal for Ukraine, too.
A deal on American access to Ukraine's critical minerals. After all, as Trump put it, Ukraine has great rare earth. And as he also put it, the deal will give the U.S. great wealth. Trump sees it as payback from Ukraine for the many billions of dollars in wartime aid sent by the U.S. to help Ukraine defend itself against Russia. But is Ukraine indeed set to sign off on it? We're preparing for negotiations in Washington on Friday, says Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, adding, guarantees of peace and security are the key. Ukraine hopes offering up its minerals would indeed bring in return some form of U.S.-backed protection. But Trump underlines, not so fast.
Well, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that because it's in, we're talking about Europe as their next door neighbor. But we're going to make sure everything goes well.
Adding, the mere presence of U.S. mining interests in Ukraine would be what he called automatic security.
Because nobody's going to be messing around with our people when we're there, and so we'll be there in that way.
Trump also said Russian President Vladimir Putin, who he called cunning, will have to make concessions if the war is to end. But Trump didn't say what they'd have to be. Though on Ukraine's desire to join NATO, Trump was explicit, saying, you can forget about that. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Chris Brown takes us now to Ukraine itself with a first-hand look at some of the mines and quarries that are now bargaining chips in a high-stakes diplomatic gamble to try to save the country from Russia's brutal invasion.
The ore being scooped out of this quarry in central Ukraine is what Donald Trump wants a piece of for the United States in exchange for arming Ukraine. Titanium, extremely strong, durable, and yet lightweight. This operation produces it for electronics and engineering components. The operations manager here, Dmytro Holik, says his country could be a world hub of titanium. Ukraine possesses approximately 20% of the world's titanium reserves, he said.
This titanium quarry contains just a fraction of the valuable minerals in the ground in Ukraine. Donald Trump, the U.S. administration, and increasingly many Ukrainians now believe that these natural riches could be part of a political deal to end the war with Russia.
Ukraine's industry also faces big challenges, with uncertainty over the war at the top of the list, which has hurt outside investment. Our CBC News team also visited this quarry 200 kilometers south of Kyiv, which produces graphite used in automotive parts and pencils. It's been going since Soviet times and looks it, with outdated equipment that badly needs an upgrade. With investments, there'll be life. The enterprise will operate, says the chief here, Valery Harkovits, adding Zelenskyy acted correctly by not making the initial concessions.
Beryllium.
This geologist says if Trump is looking for a fast return on his New Deal, he'll be disappointed.
The very quickest way for a new project is from 3 to 5 years. It's when you will be willing to push very fast.
The wisdom of a minerals pact with Trump has been divisive in Ukraine. These veterans all lost limbs in the war. Some of their artificial ones are made out of compounds such as titanium. These two useless old men, Trump and Putin, are ruling the world, said Bogdan Kovbasyuk. I don't believe there's a reason to give the Americans any natural resources because I don't trust them.
Exactly what minerals or money either side gets out of this minerals deal apparently still needs more fleshing out, Adrian, as does what kind of support or security Ukraine will receive. It's all part of Zelenskyy's agenda with Trump on Friday.
And despite all the talk of the deal, as you say, the war still rages, and we still don't know whether the United States will continue any kind of military support for Ukraine, I presume.
Nope. We don't. Neither does Volodymyr Zelenskyy, apparently, who says he'll be very direct and ask Trump. And if the answer is no, the other question will be, will Ukraine be able to buy weapons from the U.S. with frozen Russian assets? Adrian.
All right, Chris Brown and Keith for us tonight. With the final exchange of Gaza hostages for Palestinian prisoners and detainees, phase 1 of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas is now almost complete. Hamas says it has returned the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages kidnapped from their homes during the October 7th attacks. Israel released hundreds of Palestinians from detention. The truce is set to expire on Saturday, and the status of a proposed extension is unclear. There's been a possible breakthrough tonight in the search for the remains of 2 murdered Indigenous women in Manitoba. The province says potential human remains have been discovered at a landfill near Winnipeg.
An important day for Manitobans, an important day for 2 families, and an important day also, I would say, for the country.
Premier Wab Kinew says testing to determine whether the remains are of Morgan Harris or Mercedes Myron could take a couple of weeks. The women are victims of a serial killer. Their bodies were believed to have been dumped at the Prairie Green landfill. A search began in December. Well, the mother of a young woman facing an attempted murder charge in Halifax says she warned public officials that her daughter was dangerous and needed help. In an exclusive interview 3 days after a 6-year-old boy was stabbed, she tells Kayla Hounsell why she's speaking out.
My heart goes out to that little boy and his family.
Andrea Hancock is clear. The well-being of the 6-year-old boy her daughter allegedly stabbed is her priority. She says she feels a responsibility to speak out.
I need everyone to hear this.
Her daughter, 19-year-old Elliot Chorney, is charged with attempted murder. The child is now in stable condition after suffering multiple stab wounds Sunday.
It was very quick, though, that she started showing signs.
Hancock says her daughter has struggled with mental illness since she was a child and is severely unwell.
On her 18th birthday, she says, I am done taking medication. I'm an adult now.
She says the situation became so unsafe for her other child, her daughter could not continue living at home, instead bouncing from shelter to shelter. A month before the alleged attack on the boy, her mother says a passerby found her on a bridge, threatening to jump.
The police took her to the hospital to get psychiatric care, and they thought she wasn't a danger to herself and others.
She says police told her it resulted in an altercation with a doctor because Chorney didn't want to be released. She was charged with assault.
I phoned them, actually. I said, you just let a very dangerous person out on the street.
In an online forum where Chorney also shared her birth certificate to confirm her identity, she posted many comments about self-harm. 5 days before the attack, she wrote, "I apologize in advance if I live and do something awful."
The number one thing that prevents a young person from accessing help is stigma.
This adolescent psychiatrist says it is upon everyone to help reduce that stigma.
If we continue to be rooted in fear around this, we're going to prevent these young people from accessing help, and that is a disservice to everyone.
A publication ban protects the boy's identity. CBC News has not been able to make contact with his parents. Chorney's mother says she knows her daughter must face consequences, but hopes that also includes her getting the help she needs. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
Election day is just hours away for Canada's most populous province.
Thank you.
It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
The leaders campaigned on issues like affordability, healthcare, and the looming threat of U.S. tariffs. As Ontario voters go to the polls, we'll do our part to keep you on top of the results. Our special election coverage starts at 8 p.m. Eastern tomorrow night and will be available wherever you stream CBC News. Well, Liberal leadership contender Mark Carney is facing an accusation tonight linked to his recent work in the private sector. The Conservatives say he wasn't truthful about his role in moving a Canadian investment company's main office to the U.S. Kate McKenna shows us how it all started.
I know how to build strong economies.
Mark Carney's business background is his main selling point in his Liberal leadership campaign. Now it's being used against him.
I was chair of Brookfield Asset Management.
Carney was asked about his role in the decision to move the multi-billion-dollar investment firm's headquarters from Toronto to New York.
The decision, the formal decision of the board, happened after I ceased to be on the board.
Conservatives say that's not true.
He's demonstrably lied to Canadians.
Brookfield Asset Management announced plans to move its headquarters in October, a move intended to entice more Americans to invest.
There is great access to capital in Toronto, but increasingly there's more money south of the border.
Mark Carney wrote to shareholders in December, saying the board unanimously recommends that shareholders vote for the arrangement resolution at the meeting. He resigned from the board in mid-January to launch his campaign. By then, the move was all but finalized.
Signed by Mark Carney.
Conservatives say it shows Carney isn't serious about protecting Canadian business, targeted by Donald Trump.
He hadn't even taken office, but he had threatened Canada with unjustified and unjust tariffs.
But Brookfield says Canadian operations are not affected, and its parent company remains based in Toronto.
At the end of the day, his job as a chairman of a board is to act in the best interests of shareholders.
Conservatives are calling for Carney to divulge all of his financial assets, even though he's not forced to because he's not elected.
It's now more important than ever.
Mark Carney has said he'll comply with the law if he's elected. His campaign issued a statement saying Conservatives are afraid of him and are misrepresenting his business experience. But the statement didn't specifically address accusations that he lied. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
More and more people across Ontario are struggling to pay their mortgage.
We don't want to, but we may have to think of selling the house.
What's behind the rise in delinquencies? An American actor known for her roles in some big TV shows has died.
I'm a good listener.
And a father and son stranded on a cliff stay alive because of an abandoned backpack.
I've never heard of somebody finding gear and that gear led to them being able to be safe.
We're back in 2. Well, that mess is the partial collapse of a downtown Ottawa parking garage early this morning. Nobody was injured, but about 50 cars are still inside the garage. City engineers are trying to determine what caused the 6-story building to crumble, but the fire department says The garage's top floor was covered with heavy snow at the time of the collapse. Well, the number of Canadians falling behind on their mortgage payments is on the rise as the strain of the steep cost of living hits household budgets. Nisha Patel shows us how deep the trouble is for so many.
Are you kidding me?
Struggling with steep mortgage payments on their Toronto home, Sonia Sharma and her husband put the house up for rent and moved to Montreal.
Everything became so expensive for us that we had to actually look for a better cost of living place.
But they're still on the hook for $2,000 a month and may soon face a tough choice.
All in all, we don't want to, but we may have to think of selling the house.
While they're managing to hold on to the property for now, other mortgage holders may not be as lucky. In Ontario, the mortgage delinquency rate has jumped 90% in the past year. That's where a homeowner hasn't made a payment for at least 3 months. It's also climbed about 40% in BC and Quebec.
Those high interest rates that we've had for quite some time, although they are starting to come down now, that's still creating some additional stress.
The Bank of Canada has cut the key interest rate to 3%. Still, for more than 1 million fixed-rate mortgages that are coming up for renewal this year, that's much higher than when the loans were first signed.
You already have this widening gap, and is that going to get worse?
Some mortgage agents are urging clients to shop around and evaluate options like stretching amortization.
This is a moment to review, not put our head in the sand, and just plan, budget, know what's coming your way.
That's especially crucial as unemployment in Canada has been on the rise, and the risks of U.S. tariffs could weigh on the economy. Sharma says that keeps her up at night.
Now we have some people in our circle, we personally know them who are laid off, so it could be me tomorrow, it could be my husband, it could be anyone.
For now, she's cutting costs, preparing to face any uncertainties in the months ahead. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Ukraine is about to sign a deal with the U.S. over its rare earth minerals, but what's in it for them?
$350 billion and lots of equipment and military equipment and the right to fight on.
About that's Andrew Chang unpacks what the deal is worth to both countries. And we head to Ontario's cottage country to find out how loggers are coping with the threat of tariffs.
I'm nervous. I got a family to feed and a mortgage.
Why others see a silver lining.
We're going to turn the storm cloud to a rainbow for sure.
The National breaks down the stories shaping our world. Next. American actor Michelle Trachtenberg has died at the age of 39. New York City police say she was found unconscious and unresponsive in a Manhattan apartment. She's best known for her roles in the TV shows Gossip Girl and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and her earliest film role at 10 years old as Harriet the Spy back in 1996. Trachtenberg's death is not being investigated as suspicious. Well, there are more details tonight about an ongoing fight over the way healthcare procurement is done in Alberta. The choice between public or private models has led to a high-profile dismissal and subsequent lawsuit. Julia Wong now on the numbers in dispute.
Months before she was let go, the former CEO of Alberta Health Services, who is suing the government for wrongful dismissal, shared her concerns about private surgical facilities in a letter to health ministry officials. Athana Mentzelopoulos wrote, while AHS remains committed to supporting private surgical facilities, they continue to demand higher pricing and could lead to healthcare workers leaving public healthcare. That could lead to negative consequences for patients, including limiting timely access to cancer, orthopedic, and vascular surgery. This healthcare union president reviewed the letter and says it raises red flags.
As the CEO of AHS, she recognized the risk in all of this conversation. She was doing her due diligence and reporting that risk into the ministry. Public health care is for the patients, and private surgical facilities are for the profits, and they do not see eye to eye in their models.
The premier pushed back against the concerns raised in the letter.
I would say that the public system is well-resourced.
In the letter, Mentzelopoulos also compared the costs of hip, knee, and shoulder replacement surgeries between AHS and other private vendors. For example, she says a hip replacement costs around $4,000 with AHS, while it would be more than double that with Alberta Surgical Group. This health economics professor says it raises questions.
I would be alarmed at that sort of differential if this was seen as a long-term fix for the healthcare system and for the provision of elective surgery.
Alberta's surgical group tells CBC News it can't publicly defend itself because of a confidentiality clause with AHS, but says its numbers are below those previously reported. Both the company and the Premier point to national data they say reflects higher costs in the public system, and Smith herself disputes the health authority's data.
When AHS claims that they have a lower cost structure and they only include half the costs, I'm sorry, there's no credibility to that.
The Alberta government says there will be a third-party review of the issue. The Auditor General is also investigating. Neither is expected to be done anytime soon. Julia Wong, CBC News, Edmonton.
Time now to dig deeper into the story shaping our world as the clock ticks down towards Donald Trump's tariff deadline. As the tariff threat looms, some wisdom from a rural Ontario logging road.
Donald Trump's making us take a good look in the mirror, and it's long overdue.
Trying to turn the impending trade war into a moment of growth. But first,
I think many Europeans right now are to some extent in a state of shock. They have hit the panic button.
Donald Trump's deal to get Ukrainian minerals has provoked outrage while he chats with Russia. So what does he want, and why is Ukraine on board? Andrew Chang, host of About That, breaks down what each side wants and what could happen.
Donald Trump has just hit fast forward on a war that has been locked, frozen in fighting for 3 years now.
Multiple reports that the U.S. and Ukraine have reached a deal on critical minerals.
I hear that he's coming on Friday. Certainly it's okay with me if he'd like to, and he would like to sign it together with me.
Trump confirms the U.S. will gain access to critical Ukrainian mineral deposits.
It's a very big deal. Look, it could be $1 trillion deal, it could be whatever, but it's rare earths and other things.
It's what Trump has long wanted, compensation for the U.S. supporting Ukraine.
I told them that I want the equivalent, like $500 billion worth of rare earth, and they've essentially agreed to do that.
But remember, Trump and his team have also been negotiating with Russia, trying to end the war. So it was strange to hear a reporter ask, what does Ukraine get for giving up its minerals to the U.S.? And Trump said this.
$350 billion and lots of equipment and military equipment and the right to fight on and originally the right to fight.
The right to fight on, which you might interpret as the U.S. being happy to now allow the war to continue for at least some period of time, so long as the U.S. is properly compensated.
I mean, that's what I do. I do deals. My whole life is deals. That's all I know is deals.
This is one example of many in this war, where the U.S. has moved at breakneck speed for Trump to collect what he feels the U.S. is owed, but leaving everyone else scrambling to make deals of their own.
We've never had such movement in a given period of time ever in this whole conflict.
There are painfully few details right now about exactly what's in this U.S.-Ukraine mineral deal. The BBC reports Ukraine may give up 50% of resource revenue to the U.S. The New York Times seemed to cast doubt on whether Ukraine might get security guarantees in exchange. But Fox News quotes Trump as promising some measure of general security for Ukraine later on. I don't think that's going to be a problem. But while Trump attempts to extract value out of Ukraine as it wages war, he has also invited Vladimir Putin, the aggressor in the war, into the fold. And he's done this as openly as possible.
We shall now begin the voting process.
So let me set the scene for you, because what happened at the UN this week will help you understand the chaos Trump has caused internationally. The UN General Assembly is not generally where you'll find high drama.
The Assembly will turn to draft resolution A/ES 11/L10.
But this resolution, A/ES 11/L10, saw a dramatic reversal of U.S. foreign policy, where the American delegation explicitly took the side of Russia, North Korea, Hungary, Belarus, and others. So what's in the resolution? Well, 2 paragraphs the US appears to have taken issue with. This one stating plainly that Russia invaded Ukraine, not exactly up for debate. And this one, which seems to basically only suggest that Ukraine is a country with borders that ought to be respected. Again, this isn't usually controversial, but the US voted against this resolution.
That was, frankly, jaw-dropping.
That was a fundamental shift. Fundamental.
Here's a look at the massive TV screen at the UN, which shows how every single country voted. And here's the American no vote, which is in line with Russia, North Korea, Hungary, and Belarus. Despite this, most of the world still seems to believe in Ukrainian sovereignty.
Even China abstained from this.
Adopted.
And while this pleases Ukraine, Russia had little to no reaction, and same with the US.
The status quo has been completely turned upside down. Many Europeans have their hair on fire trying to figure out what to do now. In broad terms, everybody is trying to take a deep breath to go from the initial shock of Trump's outreach to Putin and get in the game, sit down with American officials and have influence.
President Trump is at the White House meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron to talk about ending the war.
I think the arrival of President Trump is a game changer. My concern is that we have to go fast.
France's president met this week with Donald Trump at the White House, what journalists like to call a charm offensive.
Thank you, dear Donald. Cher Donald. Cher Donald. Merci, cher Donald.
But with the main goal being to have a kind of American guarantee on security in Ukraine, American military heft to enforce peace.
Nous voulons la paix, on est totalement d'accord. Nous voulons un deal rapide, mais pas un accord qui soit fragile.
He hinted at the United States providing what is called a backstop to the security force.
A backstop, because the single biggest question mark in all of the deal making that's happening right now is how to ensure, once the fighting stops, that Russia or even Ukraine won't just start it up again. But the Trump administration has been very clear on 2 points. One, it does not want to put American soldiers in harm's way in Ukraine. And 2, it expects Europe to do so.
It is very difficult to see how in the short term Europe can muster those troops.
They can't do it without U.S. backing, logistical support, intelligence, electronic surveillance, satellite coverage.
So this is where things come back full circle to the mineral deal. Because if you take what Trump recently said at face value, that he's actually willing to fuel Ukraine's ongoing war as long as the U.S. receives critical minerals in exchange, you might wonder if this actually takes the conflict further away from peace. But there's another more hopeful way of looking at things.
The idea being that if they give the mineral deal that the Americans are kind of happy with, they would have a stake, an interest in providing a backstop to make sure that the peace agreement remains intact.
This might explain why you're very unlikely to see Ukraine's key allies denigrating this deal. Because you could certainly find in commentary online accusations that the US is pillaging Ukraine, referring to any potential deal as predatory exploitation, even extortion. But by Ukraine's own account, this is a deal they've sought out and are keen to make happen, with one of the country's deputy prime ministers trumpeting online, Ukrainian and US teams are in the final stages of negotiations.
These deposits are priceless. It is huge amounts of money. Huge. That is why we need to protect it. So if we are talking about a deal, that's what the Americans want, then let's do a deal.
I think that right now there is fear, some of it probably justified, that Uncle Sam is packing his bags and going home. And that when Trump talks about Ukraine causing the war, when he calls Zelenskyy a dictator, when he talks about restarting US-Russian economic relations, many Europeans are saying that, this is it. This is kind of the end of the transatlantic partnership that emerged over the course of the 20th century. Let's demonstrate to him that the transatlantic partnership still matters.
But right now, what's not at all clear is which partnerships Trump values most. While negotiating with Ukraine for its minerals, Trump has also apparently opened talks with the Russians for their minerals as well. And Putin himself may even be willing to offer Trump the spoils of his invasion.
Да, кстати говоря, что касается новых территорий, то же самое. Мы готовы привлечь иностранных партнеров.
This is an interview with state media where Putin is inviting foreign investment in rare metal reserves, but specifically ones that are in quote-unquote new territories. That sounds like he's referring to Ukraine, and specifically that part of Ukraine which Russia now controls, which hold critical mineral deposits like graphite, lithium, and zirconium that the US wants and needs.
I think many Europeans right now are to some extent in a state of shock. They have hit the panic button. Nobody knows where Trump is going to go in the weeks and months ahead.
We should be getting more clarity on the US-Ukraine mineral deal soon, but what is likely to take much longer, according to the experts we spoke to, any actual peace agreement. To think it could only take weeks would be naive, as one expert put it to us. And if that's true, that means at least three things. Ukraine will have to continue to withstand Russian aggression. Europe will keep scrambling for Trump's attention, and Trump himself will have more time to extract from this conflict whatever he feels is best.
Thanks, Andrew. Next, how the threat of tariffs is playing out among loggers.
That all collapses because of said tariff. I mean, that's a lot of people that are going to feel some pain, right?
Why others say maybe it could be a good thing for the industry. Next. Threats of an international trade war sending ripples through a small rural community 3 hours north of Toronto.
Tariffs are revealing our weaknesses.
With leaders focused on high-stakes diplomacy abroad, an idea from home.
If Donald Trump doesn't want our lumber, then let's start building houses here.
Nick Purdon spoke with a logger and local politician who thinks the Trump tariff threat might just be a hidden opportunity.
After a lightning storm, trees actually grow faster for 4 or 5 days because the lightning releases nutrients. The same way about what's happening here with tariffs. It's a storm, it's a bit of a lightning storm, and out of that it's going to get released a bunch of nutrients for us to grow, you know? It'll be amazing to see what 40 million great Canadians can do. Well, there's some that he had dug out for that order for James Martin.
Meet Tim Bryson. He's a logger.
Yeah, okay.
And he says, as painful as they could be, tariffs just might be the tough medicine the country needs.
Tariffs are revealing our weaknesses. Donald Trump's making us take a good look in the mirror, and it's long overdue. We need to put ourselves in a position where tariffs can never really threaten us so much again.
Tim lives in northern Ontario near the small town of Sundridge, and he believes his town is an example of what has happened to the country and why Canada is so susceptible to the threat of tariffs.
We had manufacturing here 25 years ago. Now we don't. The high school went from 1,400 kids, 1,300 kids to 400 kids. You know, we don't have a vibrant rural economy anymore.
As for the logging industry, Tim says things were bad enough even before Trump's threat of tariffs, and that he worries it may be the end of an era.
I started to get a few wood orders now, so how you making out? Okay. My great-great-great-grandfather moved here just east of town in 1878. It was like a big family thing for the longest time, but I'm kind of the last man standing of the family still in the forest industry.
We wired the block heater. The block heater comes up into the cab now, so you just plug right in right there.
Perfect.
Tim's logging operation employs 35 people.
I'm sure a guy could figure it out.
One of them is Brandon Pierce.
You know, what is the threat of tariffs? Like, what has it brought up inside you?
You know, I'm nervous. I got a family to feed and a mortgage, you know? All righty.
Brandon has worked here for years, but for how much longer, he doesn't know.
If it comes down to it, you know, the company will fold just simply because of tariffs. You know, and that sucks. I mean, trucking and all that stuff all comes together. Like, if that all collapses because of said tariff, I mean, that's a lot of people that are going to feel some pain, right?
Hello, ladies.
With so much at stake, Tim has watched the parade of Canadian politicians pleading Canada's case in Washington. And Tim says our politicians missed the point.
Diplomacy is important, but at some point you just need to come home and fix our own domestic problems here, you know? We have made in Canada problems here.
For Tim, the threat of tariffs is actually an opportunity to solve those problems.
If Donald Trump doesn't want our lumber, then let's start building houses here. You know, we have all of the space and all of the lumber that we need to start fixing our housing problem.
At this point, I should point out that Tim isn't just a logger. He's also the township mayor. And he knows if tariffs drive up prices, that will affect the municipality too.
Hey, Derek.
How's it going?
Tim checks in with the treasurer.
Just here to talk about tariffs. How are these going to affect our municipality?
It's going to have a large impact. It's very hard to budget precisely because we don't know exactly what percentage of tariffs he will put.
Well, keep me updated.
I will.
We'll see how things go, Mr. Trump.
See you next week.
Have a good afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see you on Tuesday for the meeting for sure.
For Mayor Tim, the formula is simple. The municipality can only thrive if local businesses succeed. And that's good protection against tariffs. So he wants to support one of the newest shops in the area. Sips is co-owned by Katie Prudhomme.
Hopefully we get through this and we're not relying on the states for our products and you know, the threat of tariffs isn't something that we have to face in the future if we can both become a little more self-sufficient. Cheers.
Cheers, cheers. You know, being a coffee shop, it's like we don't want to charge a lot more than Tim Hortons does for their product because we want people to come in our doors. We'll see you later.
The reality is Katie depends on the U.S. for some of her key supplies, like non-dairy milk. So a trade war would be bad news.
It makes me worried that our prices will have to be too expensive that people won't be able to afford to come in anymore. And that is a big scare for us, for sure.
Well, if you could say something to Donald Trump, what would you say to him?
I probably can't say that on television.
Katie represents the stakes for all kinds of businesses across the country. And it's not just about money.
You know, what would you say this coffee shop means to you?
Everything. It's my whole world. It's really my whole world. I love it. It's just so amazing to be a part of the community. It's been the biggest blessing of my life.
That's nice to hear. Wow.
Sorry.
It may be passion like Katie's that the country needs to get through whatever comes next.
Yep.
We need to look at our country and nation build. We need to be self-sufficient. You know, we can choose to be ruled by fear, or we can be courageous and just keep going, put our best effort in, knowing it's going to be a tough time for a little while, and once we get through it, we'll be back on the good side of things.
So while Bryson's logging company doesn't export directly to the U.S., the businesses who buy his lumber do. So far, he says he hasn't had to lay off any employees because he's still making sales, but he calls the market, quote, very sensitive. Coming up, a father and son rescued thanks to a bizarre coincidence.
That backpack was a miracle, in my opinion.
How a lucky find may have saved their lives. That's next in our moment. You're looking at a father and his 12-year-old son stranded on a cliff in Utah with more than a 100-foot drop, waiting to be rescued and desperately waving to a search and rescue helicopter. But there's a twist to the story. In an incredible stroke of luck, they found a backpack on that ledge left behind by another hiker, and its contents likely saved their lives. Their fortunate find is our moment.
They're waving at us. Call came in, father and son were stranded. We were able to locate them fairly quickly with thermal imaging. So we've located them. It was an extremely small ledge, over 100-foot drop down below. It's called getting ledged up. They didn't have the supplies that they needed to make it through the night, but this is pretty amazing. January 4th, the beginning of this year, we had a rescue of a 15-year-old male in that same exact area. And during that rescue, he took his pack off, and the pack ended up falling down on a ledge below him. Fast forward to this recent rescue, the father and son ended up stranded on that same exact ledge that the backpack fell on, which was a miracle in my opinion. And that backpack contained emergency blankets, a tent, food, water, basically everything that they needed.
They've got space blankets.
We're able to get them both harnessed up, bring them back into the helicopter.
Bringing them up. You want him in first or me in first?
They were happy to be off of that mountain, but I've never once heard of somebody finding gear and that gear led to them being able to be safe until they were rescued.
Think of it, they were on that ledge for 22 hours. Levi, the hiker who lost the backpack back in January, says he figures it was always intended to help somebody out. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.